Good morning. You are listening to The Other Future. This is Terry Tapp, your host. My guest on this show is Vale. Vale is, if you have kept up with a lot of punk culture, industrial culture, what we used to call underground culture, counterculture, is a name that runs through so many different trends. I came across his work when I was a teenager in rural Kentucky, and was amazed by it. He did some of the most amazing interviews with William S. Burroughs. He brought the writer J.G. Ballard, the British writer, to American audiences. He was pivotal in really seeing the energy and dynamism that was part of punk culture in San Francisco in the 70s and into the 80s. Really fantastic person, and in terms of especially paradigmatic of what the show was about. If you've listened to the show before, you know the impetus for the show, the inspiration was this despair that was highlighted by the election of Donald Trump to president. That election, to me, and what has happened after the election as well, signaled an end to something that I had continued to hope we would achieve, and that is this idea of a more exciting, creative, open-ended, sustainable even, which is really the low level of it, future. So the show focuses on people who can talk to us about the other future, who can help bring us toward the other future, who can analyze the ways we've deviated from it. And to me, Vale's work is wonderful as a focus for someone who traverses a lot of time periods and movements, as well as looks at some of those elements that I thought were going to be part of that future. Vale, are you there?
Yes, I am, Terry.
Good morning. Now, happy 4th of July.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Do you think it's happy?
Yeah, of course, man. I say that with dripping irony. So, can you tell, I mean, I gave this very, very small introduction to what you've done. Can you just introduce some of your background and what you've been involved with over the years?
Geez, it feels like a lifetime, and right. It's pretty multifaceted. Well, first of all, you know how a lot of people brag about being outsiders and all that kind of. They use that word a lot, right. But I'd like to think I genuinely was one without ever hardly evoking the word. And before the age of 7, I'd lived with 3 foster homes of different races, so that's a start. I lived with of course, I was born in an American concentration camp in just before the end of the world.
That was the Jerome War Relocation Center in Arkansas.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, yeah, they call it whatever they call it.
It's a concentration camp, yes.
Yeah, I think so.
I was just identifying
but how
the
would I know?
Right. Well, no, say more about that. Let's stop on that for a second.
I was born in an American concentration camp, and I never knew my biological father until I tracked him down in New York 20 years ago, New York City. But the point is that I think my mother was kind of driven crazy from the camp because she had been this alleged entertainer. I mean, I see Wikipedia calls her vaudeville, but she just told me that, we worked nightclubs in major cities, the 3 Taka sisters, and I remember seeing a picture she had of her on an ocean liner on one of those deck chairs. So they went to Europe too, she claimed, and did their act. And then they came back, and I think what she called the most beautiful older sister named Meaty, she described it as a jealous white man stabbed her and pushed her out of a car, but that's not what Wikipedia says. So it's hard to.
So this is your aunt.
Alternate. Yeah, that's my aunt, and then my mom and her younger sister Audrey went on as the two Taka sisters, but then World War II hit, of course.
Right.
And I think that being sort of a low-level rock star and suddenly finding herself in a concentration camp, I think, made her crazy.
Right.
And so, after she had me, she really couldn't hold a job down like a normal, boring job. And thank goodness, I think America's great. I mean, they had this amazing welfare system, which certain people are trying to dismantle. But I think without that welfare system, I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you. And it was a program called AFDC, Aid for Financially Dependent Children, and so I sort of lived a little bit with my mom up till the age of 7, but then those 3 foster homes were, I had to. My favorite was, I don't know how I got there, Peoria, Illinois, a Polish family named the Ivans family, and I think they had changed their name to be American from Ivanovsky, but that was the absolutely most fun home I ever lived in. I mean, they had an amazing culture, I guess, and sense of humor, but it's the sense of humor that was so just, I wish everyone had it.
And where were they?
Peoria, Illinois, wherever that is. and I remember like going down some steep hill on a sled with 2 or 3 other kids all crammed on the same sled, and I don't know. Their names were Bus and Pat. Bus and Fritzy Ivans, and they had an older daughter named Pat. I just remember their faces vividly, but I have no picture.
Right.
But that was the most fun. And then I lived with my uncle in Fresno, which was extremely macho. He was some sumo wrestler champion on some lower level. I mean, he didn't weigh 500 pounds. He just looked normal, but he can be Googled, I guess, sumo wrestler champion in Fresno, and I hated that. It was so macho. I won't describe why. Well, yeah, I'll describe why. I don't think they wanted me there. I mean, that's an understatement. But here I was, they're paying her something. They were raising me for just a few months. I don't think it was more than 9 months, but I remember after grade school, it was really second grade or so, I'd have to box, without gloves, bare-knuckled with their own real biological son named Isao, and boy, did that hurt. Remember, I hated that, being forced to box, and then I finally figured out a solution. I just somehow make it to school home from school as fast as possible, and then I'd be in the company of my grandmother, who didn't speak English at all.
Right.
But she was somehow, if I were with her, I wouldn't have to go box. So I wouldn't say I'm super macho.
Right.
Apparently, judged by evidence. And then the third family was for about a year and a half, just before I turned 8, I think. And that was Gershom and Wilma Hodnett in Whittier, California, and they had a daughter named Joy who was a couple years older than me. And that was very interesting because at least in their family, they only knew one family that was white, and they were what you call Okies.
Right.
And it was pretty interesting. I remember the first time I went over to their house. They were like, they didn't have really a house. They had like an acre of land or somewhere near Fresno, not Fresno, near Whittier, and there were of course all these junked cars everywhere, and they had rabbit cages. Apparently, seemingly they would raise rabbits, and they had this daughter with white blonde hair, super friendly to me at that age.
Right.
And here's how she met me. She said, "Hi, my name's Bonnie," and then she took out her blue eyeball out of her left eye and handed it to me, and there it was on my hand, the palm of my hand. I was looking at it, and then she said, "Okay, that's enough," and then she put it in her mouth, licked it, and stuck it back in her left eye. That's one way to meet someone. That's the first girl I ever met.
That's an amazing introduction. I kind of wish I could do that in a way, you know.
Oh, no, don't.
Not just eyeballs, but ears, hands. Disassemble yourself. That's, you know, this is fascinating, especially given where your attention turned next. Because let's go from there to, you moved to Haight-Ashbury in the 60s. And,
well, yeah, of course I did, because it was hip. It was the place to be. That's because I'd gone to UC Berkeley.
Right.
Well, let's collapse a bunch. Oh, I should brag and say that when I was just before I turned 8, I got to live with my real mother, which I was really happy to finally live with her. I remember the exhilaration, but then I realized that she was mentally ill, and I realized that this AFDC business, because I used to go to the meetings with the social worker, Nana Hearn, and I think I joked really early, "Hey, I'm supporting my mom."
Right.
And so I'm really grateful for that welfare program. I mean, and it was so little money, but in this town, I mean, I think you could live for $15 a month back then, you know, in a tiny place. I didn't like it when I first moved to the town, because in one small room, sort of a servant's quarter behind a bigger house, I had to live with my mother, her younger brother Sam, i.e. my uncle, and my grandmother Causeway, and me. There's like 5 people in this one room. There's no privacy. I hated it, and I threw a huge rock through the plate glass window, and they realized that I was angry about something, and immediately
crammed into a room with other people.
Yeah, and immediately somehow they moved to a nice place called the Veterans Apartments, which was just tiny white cottages, but each cottage had 4 rooms in it. And I got my own room. Anyway, this is...
No, it's just fascinating. But I do want to talk about, you know, I don't know if you heard the introduction I was giving, but...
Yes.
To me...
or no, I didn't.
Well,
but yes, I did.
Okay.
Of course I heard it.
Let me say this, just to emphasize it, because to me, you personally are paradigmatic of why I'm doing the show, and the importance of doing the show. You know, as a kid in rural Kentucky, I got a copy of a Haworth catalog and ordered a bunch of things from this, very cheap things, you know, magazines and newspapers and such, comic books. Search and Destroy was one of those, and I actually think I got it from some secondary, you know, distributor of some sort. But I was really amazed at that, and it seemed, especially coming, you know, to the Bible Belt in the late 70s, early 80s, I guess late 70s. It seemed something like a transmission from an alien world, and I'm still impressed by the fact you were able to see a movement happening, a moment. And a lot of people don't see those until they're in their rearview mirror. What struck you about what was happening in San Francisco at that time that you saw something vital, you know, that needed to be recorded?
Well, it's just so obvious that you know, they call it large pattern thinking or something, and And I had already been on the. I mean, we haven't mentioned, like, I had a beatnik uncle that brought me a copy of Howl to this small Seventh-day Adventist town, and he brought me the Life magazine so I could see visuals of the new lifestyle of the beatniks,
right?
I.e., a mattress on the floor with a candle stuck into a Chianti bottle.
So your attraction to Ginsberg then really was a motivator for you going, obviously, to San Francisco.
Oh yeah. I mean, well. See, I went when I got to live with my mother. It was in Paradise. It was although I didn't know it at the time, it was a tiny Seventh-day Adventist town. And I'll tell you what's outsider about that. It only had one store called the College Store. It had the town only had 1,200 people in it or something, but it had a Seventh-day Adventist grade school. They called it an elementary school. High school, they called it La Sierra Academy, and then the college, La Sierra College. And it got to be 115 degrees in the summertime at worst. And but because of this church, this is what's so key. The college store did not. In this town, you could not buy any form of alcohol whatsoever.
Of course, it's
well, I didn't know if you knew anything about it. A lot of people don't. And you could not buy any form of coffee. You could not buy tea with caffeine in it.
Wow,
you could not buy Coca-Cola. In fact, you couldn't buy sodas as we know it. Right. You're supposed to drink real fruit juice. You couldn't buy meat. You couldn't even buy fish.
Wow.
You couldn't buy these things. But there was the huge, beautiful Art Deco Loma Linda Foods factory, and I think a bunch of the people in the church worked there making fake meats. And it's so amusing that now there's this fake meat fad. But I think Adventists have always had absolutely delicious fake meats.
Right.
You know, from companies that I don't even know if they exist. I don't know where to buy their food anymore. Worthington Foods and Battle Creek Foods, and Loma Linda Foods. But these were Seventh-day Adventist fake meat manufacturers with factories, and they were really good.
Yeah, I didn't know that much about them. I knew no alcohol.
Yeah, and so anyway, I was in this town, and for me, the big rebellion was moving from my mother's small home, which was actually a pretty big home. I think the rent, I don't know what the rent was then, because my mom was paying it.
Right.
But my big rebellion was at 17 moving into the college dorm. So because I went to college at age 17, and experience, because you couldn't really experience the college if you didn't live on campus in the dorm. And I lived there for 2 years, the freshman and sophomore, but then I finally really rebelled. And I had a roommate who was also a rebel named Winfield Hill, and we said F this small town.
Right.
Let's go to Harvard. And I didn't know, of course, that if you apply to Harvard as, say, a sophomore in a school, it's apparently easier to get in than if you're just straight out of high school. Someone told me this later, but I didn't know that. So we both applied, we both got in, we both went to Harvard, but he stayed, and he was a real physics whiz. I wasn't.
Right.
And he just lived there, and I don't know if he's even alive. I hope so. And but I was too intimidated by those hollowed halls of ivy. It looked like it'd been there hundreds of years. The architecture. I didn't have any support system there. I chickened out. Instead, I'd also applied to UC Berkeley, and I went there. I had a scholarship there, but more importantly, I had my beatnik uncle there, and so I moved. Even though he already had 3 kids, he somehow put me up in his home. He was a beatnik my uncle was a beatnik who had apparently been in the same painting classes as Lawrence Ferlinghetti. It's either at the Sorbonne or someplace
Right.
like that. And so he was friends with Lawrence, and when Lawrence moved to San Francisco, he followed suit, and he moved there too. And, you know, that whole beat movement started around City Lights Books. And
so he knew of that.
Well, he knew about it. He was a beatnik.
So he knew.
He was definitely. He knew a bunch of these lesser-known beatniks that are probably in some histories. Like I met Alan Anson for sure.
Right.
And there was a black guy painter named Maury Rose, and I don't think he's in any books, but he was definitely part of the beat movement. He had a white woman wife a foot taller, and they already had a kid.
Right.
And anyway, so the point is that my uncle brought me from the small Seventh Adventist town and showed me the beatnik movement, like in Grant Avenue, which is where I live now practically. And you know, and it was really alive then. On weekends, it was just jammed. I saw the Keene Gallery, and I bought that Children of the World painting from there. I still have it.
Right.
And but I saw the beatnik movement myself. He tried to get me into the Black Hawk Jazz Club, but they said, no, we can't let him in.
Why not?
I was 14.
Oh, I didn't realize you were that young at that time.
Well, that was when he first brought me up and gave me the tour of. It was pretty enlightening. He introduced me to these lesbian jewelry makers, and I immediately ordered a ring from them, which they made for me.
Right.
And he also took me to a lesbian bar in North Beach. Somehow I could go to this bar, and they didn't kick me out. so I kind of experienced in a very outsider way at least a weekend of North Beach or San Francisco beatness.
Right. And, you know, that's such a vital you know, this is something that I talked about with Jason Vogel, who's a writer and curator, gallery owner, artist in New York City. You know, you have these wonderful hot spots like San Francisco with the beats, and it stayed that way for a while. And you, as I was pointing out, you know, to the people listening, you have been somebody who saw things very clearly and chronicled them. And here we are today, to bring it back to the theme of the show, one overarching theme. Today, there seem to be not only no hot spots in that way, there seems to be a deadening of activity. You know, New York is flat. San Francisco is much flatter. In 2014, I was there, and you know, I went to a party at Last Gasp headquarters, and it was just like an explosion of creative joy. All of these artists and all of this art, and you know, it stood out like a volcano on a baby's skin. I mean, just looking at the texture against that flat kind of waste that is the culture in a lot of ways. What are you seeing now? And we can return to these other things, but I'm curious. You've seen these cultural moments erupt. What's your impression of today?
Well, I have a daughter, and I fortunately I occasionally still get what I don't know if it's a cool word anymore. Interns. I must have had 100 interns at least in the last 20 years, and I suppose I'm forced to be around young people of college age, from 18 up,
right.
and of course I interrogate them on what's hip and all that, and who's your favorite bands and all that, and the one thing that started bothering me a few years ago is that never did any intern have a favorite band that was the previous intern's favorite bands, plural. In other words, there's much more diversification of I don't know. It used to be there were only a few bands you'd like,
right?
But now there are so many that I've never heard of that it's a little troubling. I mean, of course, I have my lighthouses culturally speaking, like Jello Biafra, like if anyone keeps in touch with underground bands that maybe have some gravitas and lastingness. In other words, they're not only channeling the zeitgeist of now, but maybe into the future. We hope.
Right.
He would definitely be one of them for sure. Oh, if you were at that 2014 Last Gas Party, you might have heard me play piano there.
I did.
If you were there.
Yeah.
You did?
Yeah, I stayed and just took all that in. It was a beautiful evening, especially the giant wax sculptures, the giant Bruce Lee and things. I mean, it's just an amazing and artwork by everybody, Alice Kaminsky and Robert Crumb, and like the walls filled with that. It was just, I had to make sure that I was still on this plane and had not
on this planet.
Right, exactly. Well,
anyway, I was about to say, I seem to take a long around the world ox cart way to get to a point, but
no, you're fine.
But I wouldn't say. I'd say San Francisco or the Bay Area, all the way down to Santa Clara or San Jose it's you could call it an underground again. I thought San Francisco was an underground nexus incubation center for like the hippies for sure, or the Beats for sure, because City Lights Books published Allen Ginsberg's How. Ginsberg's from New York. He couldn't get a New York publisher to publish House. Lawrence Ferlinghetti in San Francisco published it, and that sold over 1 million copies.
Right.
I mean, and that certainly affected me, because in my small town I found another outsider friend down there, and we would pretend to be Allen Ginsberg reading Howl out loud to each other, pretending we were beatniks. And
no, that's a beautiful experience. I had a friend who was studying to be a rabbi, and he would come over late at night to a warehouse I was living in, and we would get drunk and read poetry out loud for hours. I mean, that's a thing that I think artists and people who like words end up doing at some point. You kind of filter or channel the persona of these people.
It doesn't hurt to try, yeah.
Let me bring something up that you just mentioned, and I want to say it. I want to tell you why I think it's an important question that I'm asking you. You mentioned that, and I had not noticed this, that younger people coming to you were disjointed in their tastes and who they were listening to, I guess, reading, looking at, and so forth. But that, and I hadn't noticed that, which is fascinating. But that point reminds me of something Are You Serious? And Robert Anton Wilson, Terence McKenna, these people talked about years ago, which is the coming demise of the mainstream culture. And I was reading several times discussions about that, but I never really played it out in my head other than when you think, you read something about neo-Nazis infiltrating police departments. And it's 3 departments until you have like an entire nation full of them, and then it's an overwhelming reality. So I'd like to give you that question, but let me say this last thing. I sometimes, I don't want to say agonize. It bothers me that some of the thinkers that I enjoyed, like Wilson, for instance, or a McKenna, are not around to look at this moment. As I like their writings quite a bit, and I thought that their wonderful, joyful, open-ended, creative approach was what we were looking at. And as I've talked to people about that particular fact, that they had that approach and they saw us going toward this amazing future, I went back and looked, and they didn't have an optimistic viewpoint. They said, we will get to this if we'll destroy ourselves, but we'll probably destroy ourselves. Like that's where we're almost certainly headed. It's an eye of the needle problem. So you're somebody from that milieu, from that group, to me. You knew people in there, you interacted with them, and so your viewpoint is vital. And I ask, this is just one of many questions, but what do you see with an art and I guess we call it counterculture, underground culture, the outsider culture today, with the lack of a mainstream to oppose it?
Well, I wouldn't say there's a lack of a mainstream. It's certainly in our face, but with this. I don't even want to mention his name.
Yeah, he can be the Phantom.
He can be the orangutan in chief, but no, that's actually speciesist. I think I love orangutans more than
right.
the other person who has often had the word orange associated with him
right.
due to hair color or something. But no, there's. I mean, I think we live in very strange times, and I know a bunch of, or let's say I've met. I wouldn't say I know them super well, but there's a number of young people that I've been a foot away from talking, and they have envious lifestyles. Like they're doing art, they're working part time, they're sort of living off their art a little bit at least. They're doing whatever. They also have tiny part-time jobs. Sometimes, I guess one of the best jobs you could get would be a bartender because of the tips.
Right.
But then they're in bands, and then they're always seeming to me going on tours to Europe and staying in people's living rooms and their couches. Other people they met probably through social media networks. The first network that people would use effectively to stay on strangers' couches that play shows in, I don't know, Mississippi or places I would never dream of going,
right.
was MySpace. And then I guess it's been, which I was never on, by the way, and because I was late to the digital
sure.
internet rat race or whatever you call it. But now I guess Facebook has sort of replaced that, or God knows, or probably some other. But these people, you know, they're still seem to keep going in little bands you've absolutely never heard of, and they get to travel the world, and I mean, for all I know, there could be some extra income being tossed their way now and then that they don't tell me, but that's it's sort of what I call an itinerant underground lifestyle, or maybe there's an itinerant underground happening, because they'll introduce me to people from overseas or somewhere. Oh yeah, she's in town now from Egypt or somewhere, and you know, and here I am sitting next to her talking to her.
That is something that I've noticed, and I think you're headed toward at least an intuition that I'm picking up on, which is that, you know, these spaces, New York City, L.A., San Francisco, Paris, wherever, that artists and creative people have flocked to, have kind of been dispersed. And so you have this almost semi-nomadic, dislodged from geography at least, take by creative people. And I hate making that kind of bifurcation, creative people and non-creative, because I don't view the word, you know what I'm saying. But yeah, I mean, artists need company of other artists, and they need audiences, people to listen to them and look at their works and so forth.
And buy their stuff.
And buy, yes. Let's not forget that. And buy them.
Yeah, they often, a lot of these people produce zines to not only document their lifestyle and thoughts and all that, but to raise money, and then sometimes they have, a lot of them, more than you think, you know, you can buy their cassette tapes, old-fashioned technology cassette tapes for $5, and things like this, or a little, you know, maybe, I don't know, a blouse that they've hand-painted or something for
sure.
$20. But, the itinerant nomadic underground is, but it's still, places like cities are still important. I mean, like Brooklyn is still important. Not so much New York City, the Soho or Avenue is A, B, and C or whatever that used to be important in the 70s and 80s. But these places are still important. I mean, they're on the itinerary for these nomadic musicians, especially. And no one's just a musician anymore. They all do visual art,
right.
And for sure. And some of them even have slightly tech skills. to be able to do a website, for example,
right.
and produce. They know how to silk screen. I mean, a lot of these people, I think, have a sort of a well-rounded, I don't know if it's well-rounded, skill set to make money. I mean, they're versatile. They can do many things. They house sit sometimes for people that aren't here. But I think Oakland, of course, more so than San Francisco. But San Francisco still has little art galleries that I suppose the illegally visitors crash at from out of town, and you just don't know about them, though. They're not in any newspaper, and they're not really in any. You just have to know about them, but once you start finding out about them, then you kind of try to keep in touch and go to their little events. And I would say the demographic is 20s to. I suppose it could be teens to 40s, but it's also a wider demographic than. I mean, I think undergrounds have always had kind of wide demographics. So there's people who know more that are in there and they're older, and then there's very young people who just came here from some small town, but they're anxious, but they're super talented guitar players or something, and they want to find their people and start creative groups, you could say.
Yeah, it seems like any type of creative clustering of people that I've been involved with has been very diverse. And when you see them in a movie, whether it's hippies, beatniks, some Parisian bohemian club, they're always white men, which is crazy but expected. Let me back up to something else too. You actually saw punk evolve and be a thing. You identified William Burroughs as an extraordinary thinker. You identified J.G. Ballard as an extraordinary thinker and writer, and he was basically unknown to U.S. audiences. To me, you also you collected this thing that we now identify as industrial culture, which I loved, especially. I don't know if you know of Mark Pauline. Survival Research. He came to the Marlboro Gallery, I think, 2 years ago in New York City.
Yeah, I was there. Yeah,
it's fantastic. So you not only saw these and saw the development, the widespread acceptance of tattooing, what would we say? It's minority sexual practices, which I don't know. This is radio, so I don't want to go too far into that.
Right.
But you saw a lot of this as a burgeoning movement and culture and so forth. So to me, you have an extraordinary ability to understand what's going on around you in a gestalt that people don't. And I'm curious about your relation to the internet and online culture. Because you were doing all this before any of that. I found out about you through a heavy book at the bottom of a bin in the middle of nowhere in Kentucky. Actually, Owensboro, Kentucky. Not quite nowhere, but pretty much culturally. And wrote off. And that was how I found out about what you were doing. And then got research publications. So what's your take on this cultural change that's happened from that to this digital and very monitored world?
Well, you can say it's monitored, and I'm positive it is, but you can't let paranoia subsume you.
Sure.
Which is, everyone wants you to be more paranoid, and they want you to be, less creative, and they want you to be demoralized so you won't do anything. But I think you need both enthusiasm and a sense of humor to keep going today, and of course you're very affected by the media that you're exposed to.
Right.
And so I always try and be around. Again, I codified a little teeny bit of this in my little. I had a funny idea, which I sort of did. I don't know how successfully, but I did it. It was I remember when I was visiting Harvard, I of course went all over in the campus, and I just remembered a room full of philosophy books, and so like years later, I said, "Hey, I wonder if you could put the best of that whole room of philosophy books in just one sheet of paper." So I tried. It's called Goals of Life. It's something that I actually just give to people if they buy something from me, And so the point is that, and on one of these sheets, on this sheet of paper, I think I say things like, try only associate with people who encourage you to be creative.
Right.
Only associate with people to do projects with. You could argue that our conversation is a project right now.
Yeah, sure.
And because you need encouragement, because if all you do is listen to increasingly right-wing talk radio or listen or absorb corporate media, and you do that regularly, and I think you're going to be demoralized,
right,
and depressed.
Yeah, there's almost a disease that comes from those screens.
Yeah, they make you mentally ill.
Yes.
Practically everything that I'd call mainstream media makes you mentally ill and disheartens you. And so you need underground media like zines or nothing. And or I have a funny fetish, I guess you could say. I ask myself, what do the richest people in the world read? I want to read what they read, because they know more than I do, because I'm not rich, but they know way more than I do.
Right.
And so that's sort of, I try and monitor certain, I'm not even going to name what I read, but just to ask yourself this question and then find out what it is, and you read it too. Or you go to the websites too. I don't go to the websites. Websites take way too much energy out of me because I start wanting everything that they
right.
tell you, and I can't afford it. And I don't like to torment myself by putting my desiring machine inside my body, aiming it at whatever all this stuff is that I can't afford.
Yeah, that's one interesting thing about digital technology and digital living, really. It is, underneath it is, you said, the desiring machine. It is that kind of, delusion, like, push toward selling and wanting and craving. When you're talking about the room full of philosophy books, from being a poor kid in Kentucky all the way to now, I've never needed money to use my library card. And
thank goodness for the library. Oh, you didn't let me say it, but
go ahead.
I wouldn't have become anything in that town. Like, I was this little kid, and I quickly learned they're not going to kick me out of any of the libraries, and there was like a major college library that was really good in this town, and that's where I practically lived the whole time I was in that town, especially during the hot summers when I didn't have air conditioning. We couldn't afford it at all the houses that I lived in, but which were a lot, and so I quickly learned to two things changed my life. I decided to look at every book in the library. I didn't care what the topic was. I just would open it up, see if anything random would leap out at me. I just wanted knowledge.
Right.
And I started doing that from being a little kid. I literally looked at every book in this college library. They also had, a high school library and a grade school library, and of course those I exhausted really early.
Right.
But they wouldn't kick me out for some reason. And in the 7th grade, that's when I discovered mail order. And that really changed my life too. Like, wow! Like, I don't have any money on. Well, by then I had jobs, gardening, lawn mowing, anything to make money, so I could mail order things. Like, in the 7th grade, I ordered a pair of fencing foils. But unfortunately, it didn't come with masks. And then I realized, you could take out someone's eye with this really fast without a mask.
What happened to your first girl you met?
That was second grade. I mean, we're talking 5 years old. I wish I'd known how she lost that eye. She's probably a pretty beautiful girl.
Right.
I remember her face vividly, but she was like almost like what do you call them? Her hair was white and her eyes were so light blue.
Flaxen.
What do you call that? Albino.
Oh, albino. That one.
Yeah,
okay.
she was almost albino, and another thing she did was they raised these rabbits in these little hutches, they call them now. They're just homemade wooden cages with cross-hatched wire in front of the doors. I know that the people made these rabbit cages, but I remember one of her rabbits, the one I got to hug was an albino rabbit with pink eyes, and which was strange. And I remember I asked, wow, you raise these rabbits. What happens? And she says, yeah, we raise them, then we kill them and eat them, almost gleefully, which was a bit shocking to me when she said that.
Right.
Because the rabbits are so cute that you can hold them. And then you discover that they'll poop while you're holding them, but they're tiny little clean pellets.
Yeah, right. They're dainties.
Yellow-green pellets. And anyway.
Well, what are you working on now? I know.
Well, I've just turned out 3 books. One of Anton. Okay, I was going to do a whole book on Robert Anton Wilson, just like I did on J.G. Ballard in 1984. We would have long interviews with him, and then he'd give me various visual and verbal materials to use. And I was going to do that with Robert Anton Wilson, but something happened, and I didn't get to do it. But then, let's say that I remember it came to the point where, hey, I have this Robert Anton Wilson interview, long one from 1985. I should put it in a book because he hoped I would, and he died. So I did that very recently. I just cranked out a book. I just got copies yesterday, Wednesday, and it's called Underground Living. And I realized that over the years, since the 60s, I've taken over 100,000 photos.
Wow.
And I didn't realize it was that many until I started doing some thinking. Well, to do that in 50 years, you only need to take 2,000 photos a year. I've definitely done more than that. And so I did a book of 75 of my more or less underground living photos, and that's the newest book. And just before Robert Anton Wilson, I still have a bunch of Burroughs interviews I haven't transcribed and have not put them in a book yet. I mean, he hoped, I'm sure, that they would appear.
Right.
And I just taped them to death a lot. And so I put out the start of that, a book called Burroughs and Friends, which has 2 of those interviews from the 80s that I never, ever got myself to transcribe and put in a printed form. I call what I do zines, actually. They're not even really books, but they look like books, though.
Yeah, the presentation is book-like.
Yeah, they're book-like, and they pass for books in bookstores, but I also do zines that bookstores won't carry.
Right.
And like Search and Destroy was not carried by only a few bookstores because it was called a magazine then.
Right.
But it passed. Someone invented the word zine, and there's like it must be 100,000 zines out there now. A zine is just a word for anybody like you or your niece or nephew or whoever can put out a zine that they control 100%, and they can put anything in there they want. They have full control, and it's so cheap now to do it that kids are doing it literally in definitely in high school.
Right.
I don't know about grade school.
You know, it's interesting. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, there's a whole zine culture now, and all over, everywhere in the world, there are what you call zine festivals. Some of them are very small, but you can go there and travel and have a table and sell your zines and buy zines from local people and other people. There's people who travel all around going to Zine Fest. I'm not one of them, but...
See, I backed away from that. I used to edit for Zine World, and they would send me, back in the 90s, they'd send me big piles of zines.
Of zines, yeah.
Yeah, and this is like when the Internet became what it is today, essentially. A lot of those zines became obsolete in the sense that, like, we were providing news to each other. You know, you'd find out about what the ACLU had a case in Florida where someone's art was being attacked or whatever.
Right.
And I've actually followed up on some of those very vital people today. And if you look at their blogs or their websites, they fade into the background because now you can access this information pretty easily. If you want to find out about a police abuse that happened in Arkansas, you can just go and Google it. Yeah,
I know.
There it is.
Yeah, it is kind of an amazing time. I mean, I wish to come back to your desires articulated at the beginning of this conversation. I wish there was someone like Burroughs or Ballard or even Robert Anton Wilson, and in your case, Terence McKenna. I never paid attention to them because I am so anti-drug due to that religion I was raised in. But I'm not truly anti-drug. I don't care what anyone does with their personal life, but I stay away from all that stuff. The church was also super anti-corporate pharmaceutical, and that has stayed with me. You know, like natural remedies and, lots of natural food, organic, definitely. Anyway.
No, we share that. I try to stay away from, big pharma and taking
big
pills.
Pharma, they call it. But yeah, I do wish that a friend of mine kind of, let's say, has done very well trying to be a guide for everyone to what's on the Internet. He joined up with several other people, and they put out I wouldn't call him a friend, but let's say an associate. And he puts out a thing called Boing Boing.
Oh yeah, of course.
And everyone seems to subscribe to that except me, and go check it out. But to me, this takes way too much of my precious time.
I was reading Boing Boing when I think it was called Fringe Rare Review or something. There were several incarnations, I believe, before when it was actually a zine, and then it evolved into a magazine and then became a website. We're almost out of time. Let me I want to give people some information on you so they can follow up, because your interviews are amazing, your insight's amazing, and you're talking about contemporary thinkers and the paucity of those people. And what I want to do with this and with my writing as well is push that culture that I think still exists. It exists with me, with you, with many younger people, with many older people all over the place. But it's been pulled off the map, and I want to put it back on, and I want to reject the thing that is the map now, frankly. So, just a little insight. Your interviews with Burroughs and Ballard were so insightful. Every time I read them, I recall an interview on NPR that I found on a cassette tape at the Hamilton County Library in Cincinnati, Ohio, many years ago. And this just contrasts so beautifully with the depth of where you go, because this guy, he's asking William Burroughs, Cities of the Red Knight had just come out. And the driving line underneath, the engine underneath Cities of the Red Knight is a sexually transmitted lethal disease. And it actually makes you glow as well, and it produces, the redness of the Red Knight. And so this guy asked him, he said, "Are you a virologist?" He says, "No, I'm not." He said, I read. He said, "But you're not a virologist." And he said, "I find the idea of a sexually transmitted lethal disease to be so preposterous, I can't take your novel seriously." And this is, of course, 1975, 76. Just the sad mental midget state of that interview to ask a question like that without just looking outside. is preposterous. And yours, to me, are the reverse. You can go back and find more and more in them. So let's give people, what's your website address?
Oh, it's researchpubs.com. That's the word research, like RESEARCH. PUBS is short for publications, and the .com. So thanks for asking that.
Of course.
And you can also Google, I guess, Vale, V-V-A-L-E, I guess, and find me that way, maybe.
You're also going to be in Art Tokyo, right?
Yeah, I'm getting ready right now to go to the Tokyo Art Book Fair.
Okay.
And work that. And yeah, I want to kind of do more international art book fairs if I can. It's sort of an excuse to travel. Remember what Burroughs said, it is necessary to travel. It is not necessary to live.
Right. I love that quote. Val, thank you so much for taking time to talk with me today. I really appreciate it.
Oh, yeah. Thank you for the opportunity.
Oh, no problem. You have a good day, and we'll be in touch. Maybe we can have you back.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks.
Sure. Bye.